Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is Game 2 from the 2013 World Chess Championship match between Anand and Carlsen. Going into this round, both players had half a point each, and Anand on the white end in this one opened with e4. Carlsen replied with the very solid Caro-Kann defense, c6, and we go down a mainline variation with bishop f5 and h4 to follow, looking to trap the bishop and or grab some space. One of those two is prevented. The bishop will no longer be trapped, but white could grab some space with h5 later. And so one question might be, well, why not prevent both by playing h5 yourself? Well, keep in mind g5 is now available for the white minor pieces, and your h-pawn is more accessible by the white pieces. So it's just a single step with h6. Knight f3, looking to post up in the center with tempo on the bishop. This is allowed. e6 is played. Knight d7 would rule that out altogether. And, well, however you look at it, this bishop on g6 will be attacked in some way. Sometimes it's with the knight centralizing itself, and other times it'll be with h5 grabbing some kingside space with an attack on the bishop. So the bishop on g6 will be hit with either the knight or the white h-pawn. And in this game, it's hit with the knight. Knight to e5, it drops back. In short order, he will be challenged, but first we have the offer of a light square bishop exchange. And for this one moment, it looks like d4 can be captured, but that is not so due to this tactical shot on f7, where at the end of it, white picks up the black queen. And just slightly, a slight tweak of that variation after this capture, if black throws in a check, we don't move our king because this would allow this sort of exchange, and at the end of it, black is the side who's winning. But we would reply by playing c3, hitting the bishop, not attacking the queen just yet due to the pin, but we will be attacking the queen after bishop takes bishop, and now bishop d2. Now this is back on. The bishop is hit, the queen is hit, and so too is the rook. After the queen moves, knight takes rook, white is the better side. So, in short, we don't take the pawn on d4 due to the tactical shot. Knight takes f7, bishops come off, and now we challenge the one piece in our position, knight d7. f4 is there to reinforce the strong knight, and this is a very important detail, as otherwise you could be in for a very long road ahead if you're going with routine-like moves of castle. We have this sort of stuff going on. Not only might there be queen takes pawn, come to think of it, but just looking from a structural point of view, this is terrible. Backward pawn on a half-open file. Don't go down that road. You're going to get tortured. Not a good idea. So that's why we have f4 to support the knight. Now comes first check on b4, and only then dropping back to e7. So what exactly was accomplished with those last two moves? Well, how we can figure that out is by looking at this pawn. What was provoked? c3. Well, what are the differences behind having the pawn on c3 opposed to c2? Well, since it's no longer around on its home square, this queen is maybe a bit more tactically vulnerable in some lines that I will highlight in a little bit. But first, more development on the white side, playing to d2 instead of e3, I believe, so that it's not as accessible to, let's say, a black knight. So just clearing the way for queenside development, which is certainly the safer of the two homes for the white king. If you're going to play f4 and h4, you've weakened g4, you are making your h-pawn accessible. Not the safe way to go, not the safe home for the white king. So knight f6, it's queenside castle and kingside castle for black. Knight e4, and, well, why is this played? And he's not so great on the g3 square. That's one thing. And the other is that now this g-pawn could be set into motion. White would love to get a pawn up to the g5 square, where it would hit two pieces and ensure some break against the black king position. The knights, one pair of knights is exchanged, and so too is another. Now, let me just point out one variation where it shows that this queen could be tactically vulnerable. You'll note that if white is looking to open up the position in some way on the king side with, let's say, this f5 pawn break. This is terrible, of course. This queen, even if she still were protected, I'm not so sure that this would be a good idea for white to be playing this f5 move, because we would yet again have an instance where white would have a backward pawn on a half-open file. But the other one is to recognize that we don't go down that road where we lose a piece. But what if we say first, okay, let's capture on d7 and then hit at the black position with this pawn break f5? Well, you'll note that e5 is available, exploiting this pin. If pawn takes pawn, we're losing the queen, but if you can envision the pawn still on c2, this turns out to actually be a bad reply by black. e5 would not be good if this pawn were still around on its home square. So just a quick point addressing this idea of the initial deployment of the bishop to b4 and only then dropping back to e7. So knight e4, a pair of knights is exchanged, and so too is the other one with the follow-up of a queen exchange. There's not much choice. a2 is hit, the queen is hit. Do you really want to drop back to b1 and say, I'm just going to have my queen function as if it's only a bishop? No. So what are your other options? Well, it's either you exchange queens or you play to g4, which says, well, if you take my pawn on a2, I'm going to take this pawn on h6. This is the threat with queen to g4, exploiting the pin on the g file. But black would not take on a2, and the follow-up would likely be f5, challenging the queen. If this pawn is captured en passant, black is doing quite well. Even though this pawn is a bit more vulnerable, the black pieces are now mobilized. This rook is here to defend h6 and is now prepared to double on the f-file. And this queen, not to mention, is very well placed. So, in short, we did not have queen g4, but rather the queens come off the board. We capture now in the most principled manner towards the center. And now h5, locking down on this structure. One day looking for some good bishop versus bad bishop situation where he can somehow get, the bishop on d2 could somehow get at g7 or h6. b5 is the start of a minority attack to break down this strong white pawn structure. With b5, we will see a5 right away, but first a rook lift by white, looking to yet again put pressure, well, not yet again, but similar to how I showed with the queen playing to the g file, white wants to have that tactical threat in mind with bishop takes h6. So rook h3 is the start of that. a5 is played, now in a position to play b4, rook f1, rook to c8 opposite the king, and now we have rook g3, which is threatening. Bishop takes h6, there's not very many options. King h7 is played. Rook f3, this pawn is hit twice. Not very many options. The king drops back to g8. What are the alternatives? You move this pawn, you are allowing the rook to sneak into the black position and put pressure on a base point. And I'm not so sure that you really want to do that as black. You know that you really want to give up the g6 square. So black drops back with the king. That's the only other way to defend against f7, and similar to game one, we end up with a repetition of position. This is a war, really. Each game is a battle. There will be draws involved. This one is yet another. It finished about an hour and 5 minutes, and round one finished in an hour and a half. What will we have in store for round three? Tomorrow is a rest day, and then we will resume at the same time. As it stands right now, we have 2 games played, 2 draws, 1 point each for Anand and Carlsen, and we will look forward to round 3 and see what happens there. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.